In this lesson we will able to recognize José García Villa's contributions to the development of Philippine literature. José García Villa was a Filipino poet, literary critic, short story writer, and painter. He was awarded the National Artist of the Philippines title for literature in 1973, as well as the Guggenheim Fellowship in Creative Writing by Conrad Aiken. He is known to have introduced the reversed consonants rhyme scheme in writing poetry, as well as the extensive use of punctuation marks, especially commas, which made him known as the comma poet. He used the pen name Dovelian, derived from dove, eagle, lion, based on the characters he derived from his own works. Villa's tart poetic style was considered too aggressive at that time. In 1929 he published Man Songs, a series of erotic poems, which the administrators in UP found too bold and was even fined Philippine peso for obscenity by the Manila Court of First Instance. In that same year, Villa won Best Story of the Year from Philippine Free Press magazine for Mir Inisa. He also received 1,000 prize money, which he used to migrate to the United States. He enrolled at the University of New Mexico, wherein he was one of the founders of Clay, a mimeograph literary magazine. He graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree, and pursued postgraduate work at Columbia University. Villa had gradually caught the attention of the country's literary circles, one of the few Asians to do so at that time. After the publication of Footnote to Youth in 1933, Villa switched from writing prose to poetry, and published only a handful of works until 1942. During the release of Have Come, Am Here in 1942, he introduced a new rhyming scheme called reversed consonants wherein, according to Villa, the last sounded consonants of the last syllable, or the last principal consonant of a word, are reversed for the corresponding rhyme. Thus, a rhyme for near would be run, or rain, green, rain. In 1949, Villa presented a poetic style he called comma poems, wherein commas are placed after every word. In the preface of Volume 2, he wrote, "The commas are an integral and essential part of the medium, regulating the poem's verbal density and time movement, enabling each word to attain a fuller tonal value, and the line movement to become more measured." Villa described his use of commas after every word as similar to Seurat's architectonic and measured pointillism, where the points of color are themselves the medium as well as the technique of statement. This unusual style forces the reader to pause after every word, slowing the pace of the poem and resulting in what Villa calls a lineal pace of dignity and movement. An example of Villa's comma poems can be found in an excerpt of his work. In my undream of death, I unspoke the word, since nobody had dared. With my own breath, I broke the cord. Villa also created verses out of already published proses and forming what he liked to call collages. This excerpt from his poem number 205 was adapted from Letters of Rainer Maria Rilke, Volume 1. And then suddenly, a life on which one could stand. Now it carried one end. Was conscious of one while it carried. A stillness in which reality and miracle had become identical. Stillness of that greatest stillness. Like a plant that is to become a tree, so was I. Taken out of the little container. Carefully, while Villa agreed with William Carlos Williams that prose can be a laboratory for metrics, he tried to make the adapted words his own. His opinion on what makes a good poetry was in contrast to the progressive style of Walt Whitman, concerning which he said, poetry should evoke an emotional response. The poet has a breathlessness in him that he converts into a breathlessness of words, which in turn becomes the breathlessness of the reader. This is the sign of a true poet. All other verse, without this appeal, is just verse. He also advised his students who aspire to become poets not to read any form of fiction, lest their poems become contaminated by narrative elements, insisting that real poetry is written with words, not ideas. Villa was considered as a powerful literary influence in the Philippines throughout much of the 20th century, although he had lived most of his life in the United States. His writing style, as well as his personality and staunch opinions on writing, has often made him considered as an eccentric. Francia explained in Asia Week magazine, "In a world of English-language poetry dominated by British and Americans, Villa stood out for the ascetic brilliance of his poetry and for his national origin." Fellow Filipino writer Salvador P. Lopez described Villa as the one Filipino writer today who it would be futile to deride and impossible to ignore, the pace-setter for an entire generation of young writers, the mentor laying down the law for the whole tribe, the patron saint of a cult of rebellious moderns. However, Villa was accused of having little faith in Filipinos' ability to write creatively in English, saying that poetry in English has no prospects whatsoever in the Philippines, i.e., that it cannot be written by Filipino writers. An exception or two may arise after a long period of time, but these writers will remain exceptions. The reason why Filipino writers are at a disadvantage in the writing of English poetry is that they have no oneness with the English language. Villa was granted a Guggenheim Fellowship in Creative Writing by American writer Conrad Aiken, wherein he was also awarded a $1,000 prize for outstanding work in American literature, as well as a fellowship from Bollingen Foundation. He was also bestowed an Academy Award for Literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters in 1943. Villa also won first prize in the poetry category of UP Golden Jubilee Literary Contests in 1958, as well as the Pro Patria Award for Literature in 1961, and the Heritage Award for Poetry and Short Stories a year later. He was conferred with the honoris causa doctorate degree for literature by Far Eastern University in Manila on 1959, and later by University of the Philippines, and the National Artist Award for Literature in 1973. He was one of 3 Filipinos, along with novelist José Rizal and translator Nick Joaquin, included in World Poetry, an anthology of verse from antiquity to our time published in 2000, which featured over 1,600 poems written by hundreds of poets in different languages and culture within a span of 40 centuries dating from the development of early writing in ancient Sumer and Egypt. In this lesson we will able to recognize José García Villa's contributions to the